I never thought I'd see the day when complete strangers spread their picnic blankets across my private farmland as if it were a public park. But that's exactly what happened when the infamous Karen sisters decided my land was theirs to use. One Saturday afternoon, I returned from town to find cars parked along my fence line, coolers dragged into my pasture, and children running through my fields. They hadn't asked. They hadn't even considered the possibility that someone owned this property. To them, it was simply free space, ripe for their enjoyment. I stood there in shock, watching as these entitled women laughed, poured drinks, and set up lawn chairs directly in the middle of my horse pasture. My horses, gentle but easily startled, paced nervously along the far fence line, unsure what to make of the intruders. When I confronted the sisters, they scoffed at me. "It's just grass," one sneered. "Lighten up. You've got plenty of space." That was the moment the rage settled into my chest. This wasn't just disrespect, it was dangerous. My animals could be spooked, someone could be hurt, and I was being treated like a trespasser on my own land. I warned them. I told them to pack up and leave immediately. They laughed in my face, so I decided to let nature speak for me. I walked over to the gate, unlatched it, and stepped back. The horses surged forward, thundering into the field with a force that shook the ground. The picnickers screamed, scattering in every direction. The sisters' smug grins vanished, replaced with wide-eyed panic. My message was clear: my land is not your playground, and that was only the beginning. It was a quiet Saturday morning when I left the farmhouse. The sun had barely risen over the fields, casting long golden beams across the rolling pasture. My horses grazed peacefully near the fence line, their tails swishing lazily against the occasional fly. Everything about that morning felt calm, ordinary, and safe. I drove into town for supplies, not giving a single thought to what would be waiting for me when I returned. The first sign that something was wrong came as I turned down the gravel road that led to my property. Dust rose behind my truck, and as I came around the bend, I noticed cars lined up along the fence. Not one or two, but an entire row of them: SUVs, minivans, and sedans. My stomach immediately tightened. Visitors. No one was supposed to be here. My land wasn't open to the public. I slowed the truck, suspicion prickling in the back of my neck. As I pulled into my driveway, the scene before me made my jaw clench. There, right in the middle of my pasture, were clusters of people I didn't know. Bright blankets had been spread across the grass as if this were a park. Coolers were popped open, lawn chairs unfolded, and children dashed between the adults, shrieking with laughter. A couple of men were tossing a football dangerously close to the fence where my horses nervously paced. My land, my private property, had been turned into a picnic ground. For a moment, I sat frozen in the cab of my truck. The audacity of it was almost unbelievable. Who in their right mind would enter someone's farm without permission and set up like this? Then, through the crowd, I spotted them. The Karen sisters. Sandra and Colleen. Karen lived 2 houses down from me, in a gaudy 2-story that always looked like it had been ripped straight out of a reality show. They were well known in the neighborhood for their arrogance, loud, opinionated, and always ready to stick their noses into other people's business. They had made quite a reputation for themselves, and now, seeing them sprawled out on folding chairs with sunglasses perched on their noses, sipping sodas like queens of the field, I understood exactly who had orchestrated this invasion. I parked the truck and got out, my boots crunching against the gravel. A few heads turned in my direction, but most of the group ignored me entirely. It was as though I didn't even exist, like I wasn't the person who owned the land they were trampling. My horses, confined to the far side of the pasture, snorted nervously and pawed at the dirt, clearly unsettled by the crowd. I marched toward the nearest blanket, where a family of 4 was seated, passing sandwiches to their children. "Excuse me," I said, my voice tight but firm. "This is private property. You can't be here." The father barely looked at me. "We're with them," he said, gesturing toward the sisters. With every step I took closer, anger burned hotter in my chest. I reached Sandra and Colleen, who glanced up at me like I had just interrupted their afternoon spa treatment. "Good morning," Sandra said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Lovely day, isn't it? What are you doing?" I demanded. "This is my farm. You can't just invite people onto my land without asking." Colleen rolled her eyes behind her oversized sunglasses. "Oh, relax. It's just a little picnic. Look around, no one's hurting anything. It's grass. You've got acres of it." "That's not the point," I snapped. "This is private. You're trespassing. My horses are already agitated, and this is dangerous." Sandra scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Your horses are fine. They're animals, they'll get over it. Besides, you should be grateful. We're bringing life to this place. Honestly, it looks so empty most of the time." Her words hit me like a slap. Empty. This land was my livelihood, my sanctuary, my home. The crops, the livestock, the soil beneath my boots, all of it was mine because I worked for it every single day. To have these women trivialize it as empty space felt like an insult far deeper than simple trespassing. I took a slow breath, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I'm asking you, politely, to leave, right now. Gather your things, tell your friends to pack up, and get off my property." The sisters exchanged a glance and burst into laughter. the kind of cruel, mocking laugh that carried across the field. "Oh, come on," Colleen said between chuckles. "You're being ridiculous. What are you going to do? Call the cops? Tell them what? That your neighbors are having sandwiches on some grass?" Some of the picnickers joined in their laughter. My face burned. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a circus, the butt of their private joke. Every second that passed only fueled the fire inside me. I turned to look at my horses again. They were shifting anxiously, tails flicking, ears pinned back. I knew they wouldn't charge unless spooked, but the longer these people stayed, the more unpredictable the situation became. A single football flying too close, a screaming child darting past, and the animals could bolt. Someone could get hurt, one of the children, one of the sisters' guests, and guess who they'd blame? Me. That realization was the breaking point. I turned back to the sisters. My voice dropped low, almost calm. "I warned you," I said. "This is your last chance." Sandra tilted her sunglasses down just enough to meet my eyes. "Or what?" she sneered. "What exactly are you going to do?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked steadily across the pasture toward the main gate. Behind me, I heard murmurs, confused laughter, and a few mocking comments. They thought I was bluffing. They thought I had no power to stop them. But I knew something they didn't. On a farm, nature itself can make the rules. My hand closed around the latch of the gate. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, a rhythm of fury and resolve. For a split second, I hesitated, imagining the chaos that might follow. Then I exhaled and lifted the latch. The metal gate swung wide with a creak, and in an instant, the world shifted. My horses, sensing the sudden freedom, lifted their heads. Then, with a surge of raw power, they thundered forward. The ground trembled under their hooves. Dust exploded into the air. Shouts erupted from the crowd as the herd charged into the open space. Muscles rippling, manes flying. Panic spread like wildfire. People scrambled to their feet, grabbing their children, knocking over coolers, abandoning half-eaten food. Blankets were trampled underfoot as the guests bolted in every direction, screaming in fear. And in the middle of it all, the Karen sisters stood frozen, their smug smiles wiped clean from their faces. In that moment, watching them scatter, I felt the first taste of satisfaction. They had treated me like I was invisible, like my land was theirs to use. But now they knew, this was my farm, and no one trespassed here without consequence. The game had just begun. The pasture lay in chaos. My horses had settled near the far fence again, tossing their heads proudly as though they knew they'd just reclaimed what was theirs. The field itself looked like a battlefield, blankets twisted into the dirt, plastic cups crushed under boots, half-spilled coolers leaking melted ice into the grass. A few stray paper plates flapped in the breeze like white flags of surrender. The Karen sisters were red-faced, their once composed expressions twisted into disbelief and fury. Sandra's sunglasses were crooked, and Colleen's lawn chair had collapsed in the frenzy, leaving her standing in the dust with clenched fists. Around them, their friends gathered in a shaken, muttering group, clutching their children, glaring in my direction as though I had unleashed wild monsters on them. "You could have killed somebody," Sandra screeched, finally finding her voice. She jabbed a finger toward me, her manicured nail trembling with outrage. "Those beasts nearly trampled my nephew. Do you know what kind of lawsuit this could be?" I stood near the gate, arms folded, and said nothing for a long moment. The silence stretched, broken only by the snorts of the horses and the rustle of the wind through the grass. Finally, I spoke, my tone steady and sharp. "You brought strangers into my pasture. You ignored my warnings. What happened out here is on you." Colleen's face twisted with indignation. "On us? Are you insane? You opened that gate. You let those animals loose." I took a step closer, my boots crunching on the gravel. "This is their home. You're the ones who turned it into a playground. You were trespassing. Don't you dare twist this around." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Some of their guests looked nervous, glancing between the sisters and me, clearly regretting they had ever followed them here. A few even began quietly gathering their belongings, eager to disappear before things got uglier. But the Karen sisters weren't ready to back down. Sandra crossed her arms, lifting her chin defiantly. "You think you can intimidate us with your little farm animals? Think again. We have rights too, you know. This neighborhood isn't just yours. We can do what we please." Her words ignited something in me, not anger this time, but a deep, simmering resolve. I realized in that moment that this wasn't going to end with a single confrontation. The sisters weren't the type to learn their lesson and move on. No, they were the kind of people who doubled down, who refused to admit they were wrong, no matter how obvious it was. I took a slow breath, my voice low and deliberate. "This is the last time I'm going to say it. Stay off my land. If you or your friends set foot here again, I won't just let the horses out, I'll have the sheriff escort every one of you off my property. Do you understand?" Colleen's lips curled into a smirk, though her eyes still betrayed a flicker of fear. "Oh, we'll be seeing the sheriff. All right, but don't think it's going to go your way." They stormed off, barking orders at the lingering guests to pack up faster. Car doors slammed, engines roared, and one by one the vehicles filed out, leaving behind a trail of trash and flattened grass. Within 20 minutes, the pasture was empty again, save for the horses grazing calmly, as though nothing had happened at all. I walked slowly through the field, bending to pick up abandoned soda cans, plastic forks, and candy wrappers. My hands shook not from fear, but from the aftershock of adrenaline. The sisters' arrogance still rang in my ears. Their threats weren't empty. I knew that much. They were too proud, too entitled, to let this go. By the time I had cleaned up the last of the mess, the sun was dipping low, casting orange light across the sky. I leaned against the fence, staring at the horizon, and wondered what would come next. That night, the answer came sooner than expected. I was inside the farmhouse, making dinner, when the sound of raised voices drifted through the open window. At first I thought it was just the wind carrying echoes from the road, but as I stepped onto the porch, the truth became clear. The Karen sisters were standing at the edge of my property again, shouting across the fence. They hadn't come alone this time. A group of their friends, maybe 10 people in total, stood with them, waving phones in the air, filming, narrating loudly as if staging some kind of reality show confrontation. "There he is," Sandra called out, her voice carrying across the quiet fields. "The crazy farmer who tried to kill our kids with his wild animals." Colleen added her own venom, pointing at me like I was a criminal. "We're documenting everything. The authorities will hear about this. You'll regret ever messing with us." Their friends cheered them on, holding cameras steady, egging them into louder accusations. They called me reckless, dangerous, unstable. The words echoed through the night, false and cutting, designed to paint me as the villain. I stood on the porch, my fists clenched at my sides, forcing myself to stay calm. If I shouted back, they'd only twist my words, cut them into clips, post them online as evidence of my so-called rage. I couldn't play their game. Instead, I lifted my phone and calmly recorded the scene from my side. Every insult, every lie, every slanderous claim. They were giving me proof of their harassment without even realizing it. After a while, perhaps frustrated that I wasn't taking the bait, the group began to disperse. But the sisters lingered, their voices dropping low, their threats sharpened. "You think you scared us today?" Sandra hissed across the fence. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Colleen smirked, her eyes glinting in the fading light. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." Then they turned and stalked away, leaving me standing on the porch with my phone still recording, my chest tight with the weight of what was coming. As the night deepened and silence finally returned, I sat at the kitchen table, replaying their words over and over. The picnic invasion had been bad enough, but this was a declaration of war. The sisters weren't just trespassers anymore. They were enemies, determined to break me, to twist the truth, to paint themselves as victims in a story where they were the aggressors. I knew I'd need to be smart, careful, strategic. They would come at me with lies, with drama, with manipulation. But I had something they didn't: patience, truth, and a farm full of witnesses who didn't lie. As I turned off the lights and locked the door, one thought burned clear in my mind: the battle had only just begun. The next morning I woke to silence, but it was not the peaceful kind I loved about farm life. It was heavy, tense, as though the air itself was waiting for the next strike. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window toward the road, half expecting the Karen sisters to show up again. They didn't, but I knew better than to think they had given up. By mid-morning the phone calls started. First, it was a friend from town. "Hey," he said cautiously, "I saw some posts online. Is everything all right out there?" My stomach sank. "What kind of posts?" I asked. He hesitated. "Videos. The sisters are saying you let your horses loose on purpose. They're calling you unstable, a danger to the neighborhood. A couple of their friends are backing them up in the comments." I pinched the bridge of my nose, closing my eyes. I had expected them to twist the story, but hearing it confirmed still made my blood run hot. "They were trespassing," I muttered. "They brought 20 people into my pasture without asking." "I believe you," my friend said quickly, "but you should know they're stirring people up. Some folks are already saying they'll call animal control on you." Animal control, of course. It was exactly the kind of underhanded move the sisters would make, turning the blame onto my horses, pretending the animals were dangerous instead of admitting their own stupidity. I hung up and went straight to the barn. My horses nickered softly when they saw me, their ears flicking forward, eyes calm and trusting. I stroked their necks, my anger hardening into something colder. "Don't worry," I murmured. "They won't take this from us." But the sisters weren't finished. That afternoon, a white SUV pulled into my driveway. The county sheriff stepped out, his expression weary but professional. "Afternoon," he said, tipping his hat. "We've had some complaints. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" I nodded stiffly. "Let me guess. The Karen sisters." He gave a small sigh, confirming my suspicion without saying the words outright. "They claim you released your horses intentionally while people were in your pasture. They're calling it reckless endangerment." I gestured toward the fields, where my animals grazed peacefully. "They were trespassing. I told them to leave. They refused. What happened was on them." The sheriff studied me for a long moment, then pulled out a small notepad. "Do you have proof?" Wordlessly, I pulled out my phone and opened the videos I had recorded the night before. The sheriff watched as Sandra and Colleen shouted across the fence, accusing me of being crazy and dangerous, threatening me with retaliation. Their words rang loud and clear from the speaker. He nodded slowly, sliding the phone back toward me. That'll help. For now, you're not in trouble. But I'd advise you to put up more signage around your property, no trespassing signs. Maybe a locked gate. It'll make it harder for them to twist things against you. I thanked him, though inside I felt a storm brewing. The law was on my side. But the sisters weren't fighting in court. They were fighting in the court of gossip, where lies spread faster than truth. Sure enough, within days the whispers began to reach me from every corner of town. At the feed store, 2 women fell silent when I walked in, their eyes narrowing. At the diner, a man at the counter muttered something about reckless farmers under his breath. Even at church, I felt the weight of judgmental stares from people. I'd known for years the Karen sisters had poisoned the well one evening. As I unloaded hay bales from the truck, my neighbor, old Mr. Thompson, came over. He leaned heavily on his cane, his face etched with worry. "Son," he said, "you need to be careful. Those women are telling anyone who'll listen that you're dangerous. They're trying to turn the neighborhood against you." "I know," I admitted, wiping sweat from my brow, "but the truth is on my side." He shook his head. "Truth doesn't matter much to people who crave drama. You've got to play this smart. Don't give them a single excuse to twist things further." His words stayed with me long after he left. I realized that this wasn't just about defending my land anymore. The sisters were trying to ruin my reputation, to isolate me, to paint me as the villain so no one would question their entitlement. The final straw came a week later. I returned from town to find flyers tucked under my gate, fluttering in the breeze. They were cheaply printed, with bold black letters screaming, "Warning, dangerous farmer nearby, unstable, reckless, keep your children, Safi." My name and address were printed at the bottom. For a long moment, I stood there staring at the paper, my hands trembling with rage. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was slander, deliberate and public. They were trying to destroy me. I took the flyer inside, laid it on the table, and stared at it until the anger in my chest turned into something sharper. If they wanted a war, I would give them one. But it wouldn't be fought with shouting across fences or cheap lies. No, I would fight with proof, with patience, with every tool at my disposal. That night I began gathering my evidence. Every video, every photo, every text message and voicemail. I compiled it into folders, labeled and dated. I printed copies of the sheriff's report and even spoke with a lawyer in town about slander laws. The sisters thought they could twist the story, but they had underestimated me. They saw a quiet farmer and assumed weakness. They mistook my patience for submission. They were wrong. As I stood on the porch, the night air cool against my skin, I made a vow to myself and to the land beneath my boots. I would not let them take my peace, my farm, or my name. The Karen sisters had declared war. Now it was my turn to fight back. The following week, I became a man with a plan. No more waiting for the sisters to make their next move. No more standing by while they poisoned my name in the community. If they wanted to fight dirty, I would fight smart. The first step was preparation. Every evening, after tending to the horses and finishing the day's farm work, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. Folders of evidence spread around me. I organized everything. Videos of their picnic invasion, recordings of their screaming threats at the fence, photos of the damage they left behind. I even took pictures of the flyers they had distributed, making sure the world would see exactly how far their lies had gone. I wasn't doing this just for myself. I was doing it for the farm, for the animals, for the reputation I had built through years of hard work. One false story from them could undo everything if I let it. The second step was protection. I drove into town and bought a dozen bright red no trespassing signs. I posted them along every fence line, nailed them to the posts at every entrance, and even hung a large one on the gate itself. I wanted there to be no question anyone stepping foot onto my property without permission would be breaking the law. I also installed 2 motion-activated cameras, one at the main gate, another aimed at the pasture. If the sisters tried anything again, I'd have it all on tape, but I knew signs and cameras alone wouldn't stop them. The sisters thrived on attention. Their lies only worked if people believed them, and so far, they had managed to sway more than a few neighbors. To turn the tide, I needed the truth to speak louder than their gossip. Opportunity came sooner than I expected. It was a warm Saturday afternoon when the local farmers market opened in town square. Nearly everyone from the community attended: neighbors, shop owners, families with kids. I loaded the truck with fresh produce from my garden and drove in, setting up my small stall alongside the others. I could feel eyes on me as I worked, whispers drifting from passing conversations, and then, like a storm cloud rolling in, the Karen sisters appeared. They strutted through the market with smug smiles, pausing here and there to chat loudly with vendors, throwing not-so-subtle glances in my direction. They wanted a scene. I didn't give it to them. Instead, I greeted customers warmly, sold jars of honey and baskets of vegetables, and let my calm demeanor speak for itself. But I was ready when they finally approached. Well, Sandra said, her voice carrying just enough for nearby shoppers to hear. If it isn't the neighborhood's most dangerous man. Colleen gave a theatrical gasp. Careful, everyone. He might let his wild beasts loose right here in town. A few people chuckled nervously, others frowned, but most turned to watch. It was exactly the audience the sisters wanted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply reached under my stole and pulled out a folder I had brought with me. Inside were copies of the sheriff's written notes, still stamped with the county seal. I laid them flat on the table where everyone could see. This, I said calmly, is the sheriff's official statement. He investigated their claims and found no fault on my part. The trespassing, however, is well documented. I held up one of the printed flyers they had distributed, then set my phone on the table and played the recording of Sandra shouting across my fence. The sisters' faces drained of color as their own words filled the air. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Gasps spread through the crowd. People leaned closer, murmuring to each other. The truth was louder now, undeniable. Sandra stammered. That's out of context, but Colleen's protest was drowned out by the shift in the crowd. The whispers weren't aimed at me anymore. They were aimed at them. Shoppers turned away from the sisters, their expressions cold, disapproving. One woman muttered, "Unbelievable," shaking her head as she walked off. Another man said flatly, "So you lied." The sisters sputtered and fumed, but the damage was done. They had wanted a public scene, and they got one, just not the way they expected. They stormed off, their heels clacking angrily against the pavement, while I went back to selling my produce with a quiet smile. But even as I enjoyed that small victory, I knew it wouldn't be the end. The Karen sisters didn't know how to back down. Sure enough, 2 nights later, I caught them skulking near the edge of my property. My new cameras lit up with movement alerts, and when I checked the feed, there they were, flashlights bobbing, trying to peer over the fence into the pasture. I stepped out onto the porch, the beam of my own flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Smile," I called out. "You're on camera." They froze, deer in headlights, then scrambled back toward the road. The next morning, I printed still images from the footage and tacked one to the gate with a note. "Trespassers will be prosecuted by now." It was no longer just about protecting my land, it was about holding them accountable. I met with my lawyer again, this time bringing the full file of evidence. He flipped through it slowly, nodding with satisfaction. "You've got a solid case," he said. "Defamation, harassment, trespassing, you could take them to court and win. If they keep this up, we'll file." That night, I slept easier than I had in weeks. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the balance shifting in my favor. The sisters had underestimated me. They thought I would fold under their noise, but all they had done was push me into gathering proof, building a case that would expose them for who they truly were. And yet, a part of me still wondered, would they finally realize they were beaten, or would they strike back harder, more desperate than before? As I looked out across the moonlit pasture, my horses grazing peacefully under the stars, I tightened my resolve. Whatever came next, I was ready. The war was far from over, but the tide had turned. The sisters didn't disappear quietly. For a brief moment after the farmer's market, I thought maybe they'd finally realized they'd gone too far. The shift in the community's opinion had been obvious. Neighbors who once whispered behind my back had begun greeting me again. A few even apologized for believing the sisters' lies. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the truth was holding ground, but Sandra and Colleen were not the kind of people who admitted defeat. Instead, they grew bolder, more reckless. Every time they looked at me, I saw a new level of fury in their eyes, as if they weren't just fighting to win anymore, but to destroy me completely. It all came to a head on a stormy Friday night. Rain hammered the roof of the farmhouse, and lightning split the sky. I had just finished dinner when the alert from my pasture camera pinged my phone. Motion detected again. I opened the feed and froze. The Karen sisters were back, but this time they weren't just snooping. They had bolt cutters in hand, working furiously at the chain on the gate. Behind them, headlights from a parked car illuminated their figures in the rain. This was it, the proof I had been waiting for. I grabbed my raincoat, but before I even stepped out, I called the sheriff. "They're here," I said, caught on camera. "They're trying to break in." By the time I reached the gate, my flashlight beam cutting through sheets of rain, they had just managed to snap the chain. The gate hung loose, swinging open with the wind. My horses shifted nervously in the distance, clearly aware of the disturbance. "What do you think you're doing?" I shouted over the storm. The sisters spun around, rain plastering their hair to their faces. Sandra's eyes were wild. "We're proving a point," she screamed. "These animals are dangerous. We're going to show everyone." Colleen raised her chin, defiant, even as water streamed down her face. "You don't deserve this land. It should belong to people who know how to use it, not some stubborn farmer hiding behind his animals." I couldn't help the bitter laugh that slipped from my throat. "So your plan is to break into my property and let my horses loose in a thunderstorm? Do you even hear yourselves?" Before they could answer, the familiar sweep of headlights appeared down the road. The sheriff's car pulled up, followed by another patrol. Officers stepped out quickly, rain slicking their uniforms as they approached. The sisters' confidence faltered. Sandra stammered, He's lying. We were just checking, but the sheriff cut her off, his voice firm. Save it. You've been caught red-handed, and we've got the footage to back it up. He gestured toward the gate, the broken chain glinting under the flashlight. Trespassing, property damage, attempted release of livestock. That's enough to press charges. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, the sisters went pale. Their arrogance drained away, replaced with the wide-eyed realization that they were no longer in control. The deputies cuffed them right there in the rain as their shrill protests filled the air. This isn't fair. You don't understand. He's the problem, not us. But their words carried no weight anymore. Not with the sheriff, not with the cameras rolling, and not with the growing group of neighbors who had gathered along the road, watching the spectacle unfold. By the time the patrol cars pulled away, the storm had begun to ease. I stood by the gate, drenched to the bone, but lighter than I had felt in weeks. The nightmare was over. In the days that followed, everything shifted. Word spread quickly this time, not from the sisters, but from the sheriff's official report. The truth was undeniable now. The Karens had lied, trespassed, and tried to sabotage my farm. The videos and photos I had collected sealed the case, and soon enough they were facing fines, community service, and restraining orders that kept them far from my property. Neighbors who had once doubted me now came to my door with casseroles and handshakes, offering apologies and support. Mr. Thompson stopped by with a firm pat on the back and a simple, "Knew you'd handle it, son." As for my farm, peace returned. The horses grazed without disturbance, the land stretched quiet and free again, and I could finally breathe without the weight of constant battle pressing on my chest. I didn't celebrate their downfall, not exactly. Watching the sisters face the consequences wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. They had crossed every line, and now they were forced to reckon with it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields in gold, I stood by the fence, leaning against the worn wood, and let the quiet sink in. This farm was mine. My home, my sanctuary, my life, and I had defended it not just with anger but with patience, proof, and persistence. The Karen sisters had thought they could break me. Instead, they had only made me stronger, and that was the true victory.